Hello, my YouTube family. Welcome back to Crime Whisper. I'm here to guide you through another chilling and deeply tragic case. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you relax or fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. Now, get comfortable and let's begin. Case 1. The Pike County Massacre. The Roden family murders. Hannah Roden was just 13 when she met 18-year-old Edward Jake Wagner at a school dance. They quickly became inseparable, and before long, the Roden and Wagner families started spending time together, sharing weekends, family gatherings, and parties. When Hannah turned 15, she revealed she was pregnant. Jake was thrilled, and so was his family. The Wagners believed strongly in tradition and family lineage. They loved children and often passed names down through generations. Jake's father was George Wagner III, and his brother was George Wagner. The Roden family was more grounded and practical. Even though Hannah's parents, Christopher Roden Sr. and Dana Roden, were divorced, they remained close and devoted to their 3 children, Christopher Jr., Frankie, and Hannah Mae. Dana worked as a nurse's assistant, and Christopher took on odd jobs. Their home was modest, but full of love, values, and care. When baby Sophia was born, the Rodens celebrated with a big family party. But behind the smiles, trouble was growing. Jake wanted Hannah to move in with his family, but she refused. Over time, Jake had grown possessive, even controlling. What had once been a sweet young love began to turn toxic. In March 2015, Hannah finally ended the relationship. She was tired of Jake's behavior and decided to raise Sophia on her own. She went back to school, worked as a nursing assistant, and focused on her daughter. But Jake and his family didn't take the breakup well. They wanted full custody of Sophia. Jake even tried to manipulate Hannah into signing custody rights over to him and his brother. When she refused, tensions boiled over. In one disturbing message, Jake threatened to use force, if necessary, to get custody of Sophia. The Wagners began to see Hannah not just as an obstacle but as a threat. Then Hannah became pregnant again. She insisted Jake was not the father, but he was suspicious. In December 2015, Jake hacked into her social media, looking for evidence. He found none. Their custody battle continued, and the emotional temperature rose. At one point, Hannah told the Wagners in a message, "You'll have to kill me first before you take my child." Jake shared this message with his family. What happened next was chilling. Jake's grandmother, Rita Newcomb, forged a custody-related document, and during a court hearing, an argument erupted between Christopher Roden Sr. and George Wagner III, shattering the fragile connection between the families. By Christmas 2016, the Wagner family began planning something unthinkable. They believed the only way to gain custody of Sophia was to eliminate the entire Roden family. They held a family vote and every member agreed. Over the next 5 months, the Wagners meticulously planned the murders. They studied the homes, installed surveillance, learned their schedules. Angela Wagner bought a communications jamming device. George Wagner III made a homemade silencer and arranged for transportation. The Wagners even waited until it was their turn to have Sophia under court-ordered shared custody, keeping her far from the massacre they were about to carry out. April 22, 2016, the massacre begins around 8 a.m. George Wagner III arrived at Christopher Roden Sr.'s home under the pretense of offering a job. It was a trap. Moments later, Christopher and his cousin Gary were found dead. Bobby Jo Manley, a family friend, arrived to feed the Roden animals. She noticed something was wrong. The house was unusually quiet. Inside, she found a scene of horror: blood, silence, panicked. She rushed to other homes nearby, where more tragedies awaited. She found Clarence, Frankie Roden, and his fiancée Hannah Hazel murdered in their bed. Their 6-month-old baby, lay between them miraculously alive, but covered in blood, at another house. Dana Roden, 19-year-old Hannah Mae, and 16-year-old Christopher Jr. were all found dead. Hannah's newborn baby girl, just 4 days old, had been spared. One more victim, Kenneth Roden, Christopher Sr.'s brother, was discovered later in his trailer, about a 15-minute walk away. He too had been killed. By 2 p.m., the horror was fully revealed. Members of the Roden family were dead. Only the youngest children had survived: a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old, a newborn, and 2-year-old Sophia, who had been safe at the Wagner home during the killings. Aftermath and investigation. And police determined that all victims were shot execution style in their sleep. Some, like Christopher Sr., showed signs of struggle. He had been shot 9 times. Dana had 5 gunshot wounds to the head and neck. Others had been shot 2, 3, even 5 times, often after death. The killers had used silencers. No neighbors reported hearing gunshots. It was a silent, calculated slaughter. Shell casings from different firearms were found at the scene. It became clear this was a coordinated massacre involving multiple people. A family wiped out, methodically and mercilessly. Part 2. The Pike County Massacre. Justice and Aftermath. Welcome back, True Crime family. If you've made it this far, I know you're invested in the story of the Roden family, a story filled with grief, betrayal, and one of the most cold-blooded murder plots in American history. Let's continue. Fear grips the community. The brutality of the crime-stunned Pike County, Ohio. The killers had to be someone familiar to the family. The dogs hadn't barked that night, which suggested the attackers were known to them. As investigators searched for answers, the Ohio Attorney General's office stepped in, providing over $20,000 to help with the Roden family's funeral expenses. The burials were held in stages. Gary Roden was the first to be laid to rest on April 28, 2016, in South Shore, Kentucky. Hannah Hazel's service followed on May 1st. The remaining family members were buried on May 3rd in West Portsmouth, Ohio. Hundreds of residents attended the funerals, united in grief. The surviving children, some too young to even understand what had happened, were placed in the care of relatives. Fear spread across the community. Police urged residents to remain indoors at night. They warned the Roden family's extended relatives to take extra precautions. What had happened wasn't just tragic, it was terrifying. An investigation without answers. Authorities searched the 3 crime scenes, followed by multiple vehicles and nearby homes. Forensic experts combed through every detail, but despite their best efforts, no DNA was found. Security cameras at the homes had been disabled. It was as if the killers had erased every trace. Then came a discovery, one that shifted the narrative. At 3 of the crime scenes, officers found marijuana plants. At one property, around 200 plants were discovered. Investigators suspected the cannabis was being grown for sale, not personal use, which initially led to theories about Mexican drug cartels. But the quantity simply didn't match a cartel level operation. In January 2017, a Roden family relative was arrested for drug trafficking, but this seemed like a coincidence. Dana Roden's father, Leonard Manley, insisted that his daughter had nothing to do with it. While some acknowledged that Christopher and Kenneth Roden grew marijuana, there was no indication of a larger criminal enterprise. Authorities also found cages and equipment for cockfighting. But once again, this lead went nowhere. Months passed, and the public grew restless. The motive remained a mystery. On April 13, 2017, nearly a year after the massacre, officials admitted they didn't yet have enough evidence to make an arrest. Prosecutor Rob Junk stated that the investigation was still active and hinted they were holding information back. The second anniversary of the massacre came and went. No local officials attended the memorial. There was no press coverage. Many residents began to believe the case had gone cold. The investigation breaks wide open, but that changed in May 2017. On May 12th, A SWAT team unexpectedly raided a home about 10 miles from the crime scenes. They weren't making arrests, yet just collecting evidence. Shortly afterward, investigators searched a property once owned by Jake Wagner in Adams County. And then came the shift. By June 20th, 2017, the investigation had zeroed in on one family, the very same family that had once been so close to the rodents. The Wagner's investigators focused on Jake Wagner, then 26, his brother George Wagner for 27, their father George Billy Wagner 347, and their mother Angela Wagner 48. The family had recently moved to Kenai, Alaska, claiming they needed a fresh start. Publicly, the Wagners expressed their grief. They said the Roden family's deaths had devastated them, but behind the scenes, law enforcement was digging deeper. The public was asked to come forward with information on the Wagners, anything about their gun purchases, ammunition, vehicles, or strange behavior. The arrests and confessions on November 13, 2018. The long-awaited breakthrough came. The Wagners were arrested and charged with planning and executing the murders of 8 members of the Roden family. Angela's mother, Rita Newcomb, and Billy's mother, Frederica Wagner, were also arrested, charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. Rita had helped forge a guardianship document for Sophia, the daughter of Jake and Hannah Mae. In 2019, Rita underwent handwriting analysis. To avoid prison time, she accepted a plea deal. The charges against Frederica were dropped later that year. Then came the real twist. On April 22, 2020, exactly 5 years after the massacre, Jake Wagner pleaded guilty to killing 5 of the 8 victims in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Jake agreed to cooperate and testify against his family. He was hit with 23 criminal charges, including 8 counts of aggravated murder, conspiracy, illegal possession of firearms, tampering with evidence, interception of communications, and lawful sexual conduct with a minor. Jake revealed that he saw no other way to gain custody of Sophia than to kill Hannah Mae, and, in his mind, anyone who might retaliate. In his twisted logic, that meant eliminating the entire Roden family. Trials and sentencing. Jella Wagner was next. On September 10th, she pleaded guilty to conspiracy, aggravated robbery, and tampering with evidence. In exchange for her testimony, the murder charges were dropped. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. George Wagner IV stood trial in August 2022. Despite denying involvement, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his role in the planning and cover-up. He was convicted on 22 charges and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. George Billy Wagner III was scheduled to go on trial in February 2024. He maintains his innocence to this day. The aftermath. Once tightly knit, Wagner family had unraveled completely. Their actions destroyed not just one family but 2. They left behind 3 orphaned children, including Sophia. Sophia now grows up under the shadow of a legacy she never chose. One day, she may come to understand the truth that her own father murdered her mother and nearly her entire maternal family to gain control of her life. What will she feel? What will she become? That's a question no one can answer. Case: the disappearance of Diana Maria Queer Lopez Pinel. Welcome back, True Crime family. Tonight, we explore the mysterious disappearance of Diana Maria Queer Lopez Pinel, a case that gripped Spain with its tragic twists, unanswered questions, and disturbing family secrets. A summer that changed everything. In the summer of 2016, Diana, her mother, and her younger sister Valeria were vacationing in the quiet coastal town of Apobra do Carome, a place the family had visited often, with a population of around 10,000. It was the perfect escape from the noise and chaos of city life. On the night of August 21st, Diana asked her mother for permission to go out. She planned to meet her friends at Valcarcel Park to celebrate the local feast of the Virgin of Carmen. The park was just a short walk from their vacation. Cottage familiar, safe, routine. her mother agreed, unaware it would be the last time she'd see her daughter. Diana spent the evening with friends. Around 2:30 a.m., she said her goodbyes and began walking home. On the way, she ran into a friend, Paso di Ariel, near her favorite pizzeria. He would be the last person to see Diana alive, a missing daughter by the morning of August 22nd. Everything changed when Diana's mother, Christina, realized her daughter hadn't come home. She immediately grew concerned. Diana's phone was turned off, something completely out of character. Without hesitation, Christina called the police and reported her daughter missing. According to her mother, Diana had no history of mental health issues or instability. Despite her parents' divorce, she had adjusted well. But the disappearance didn't make sense. She hadn't taken her ID or credit cards. Nothing suggested she planned to run away. The first clues the investigation started quickly. The first breakthrough came from a WhatsApp message Diana had sent to a friend in Madrid just before she vanished. In the message, she mentioned being followed by a strange man, shouting bizarre phrases. She was frightened. That message was the last anyone heard from her. Soon after, police found a black hairband on the road, believed to be Diana's. It matched the one she wore that night. There were no surveillance cameras in the area. The road was poorly lit and nearly deserted, with only a few garages and an abandoned nightclub nearby. Some witnesses claimed they saw Diana get into a car with 3 men and then switch to another vehicle, but these accounts were never verified. Theories and dead ends. Investigators explored several possibilities. Was it someone she knew? Was it a random attack by a mentally unstable person? Or, as her mother speculated, had Diana been taken away by boat? New information only deepened the mystery. A friend and former boyfriend revealed that Diana had recently met a Moroccan man and had purchased hashish with him. That detail, however, didn't lead anywhere useful. The media reported that Diana's jacket had been found, but her mother denied this, calling it misinformation. Nothing suggested Diana had left voluntarily. Her belongings remained untouched. Her credit cards were unused. She had simply vanished. Family secrets come to light as the investigation dragged on. The press uncovered troubling details about Diana's home life. According to reports, Diana and her mother had a serious argument just days before she disappeared. Some sources claim Diana suffered a nervous breakdown, while others said her younger sister Valeria was also hospitalized around that time due to emotional distress. In response to the situation, a court awarded custody of Valeria to her father, citing the emotional instability in the home. When Diana disappeared, her father took Valeria and left town, fueling speculation that the family was hiding something. Diana's friends claimed that she and her sister often ran away after family disputes, raising questions. If running away was not unusual, why was her mother so alarmed this time? Public pressure and silence. In August 31st, Diana's parents were expected to appear at a press conference to give an update, but they never showed. Their lawyer claimed they were too distraught to speak publicly, too overwhelmed by the fear that Diana might never return. Then, on September 11th, an article in El Mundo revealed something that contradicted the mother's claims. Diana had gone missing before. In April 2016, just months before her disappearance, Diana had turned off her phone and vanished for 3 days, telling her mother afterward that she no longer wanted to live with her. Christina had not reported this to the police. Private letters exchanged between Diana and Valeria surfaced, letters that exposed deep emotional struggles. Valeria had reportedly been hospitalized multiple times, including one incident involving an overdose of prescription drugs. Prosecutors later launched a separate investigation into the alleged abuse of Valeria, the youngest daughter. Investigative efforts continue. Forensic teams analyzed Diana's toothbrush, hairbrush, diary, laptop, and prescription medication. Investigators questioned acquaintances, including the Moroccan man Diana had met, but every lead seemed to end in a dead end. Police scoured forests, mountains, rivers, and lakes surrounding the area. They tracked Diana's phone, which last pinged near Taragoga, about 13 miles from the vacation home around 3 a.m., shortly after she was last seen then. A potential breakthrough, digital activity, and hopes of NT. 2 days after Diana disappeared, her cell phone and a hairband matching hers were found. Her father confirmed the phone belonged to her. Even more startling, her Facebook profile suddenly became active 2 months after she went missing. Friends and family immediately alerted the police and shared screenshots. It appeared someone had used the forgot password feature to try to access her account. That left 2 possibilities. Diana herself was trying to regain access. Someone else had her phone and possibly her. Still, despite renewed hope, the phone yielded no usable evidence. No messages, no traceable location data. No clue that could explain where she had gone or what had happened to her. To be continued as of now. The case of Diana Maria Queer remains unsolved. A beautiful, bright young woman vanished from a sleepy seaside town with no witnesses, no clear motive, and no closure. Her story isn't over, and on Crime Whisper, neither is our search for the truth. Stay tuned for part 2, where we explore the eventual breakthrough, the shocking arrest, and the disturbing truth about what really happened to Diana Queer. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and sleep well if you can. The investigation into the disappearance of Diana Maria Queer Lopez Pinel finally gained momentum on November 10, 2006. That was the day authorities identified the driver of the car in which Diana was last seen. The man had a known history of involvement in human trafficking, but this detail was initially withheld from the public to avoid jeopardizing the case. At first he had an alibi. His wife told investigators he was home with her the night Diana vanished. This temporarily cleared him of suspicion. Then, on December 25, 2017, a breakthrough occurred. A young girl was attacked by a man who demanded her phone and threatened her with a weapon. She screamed, drawing the attention of a nearby couple who intervened just in time to stop the attacker, who had been trying to force her into his car. The girl, though shaken, quickly reported the incident to the police, giving them a description of her assailant and the license plate number of his vehicle. The very next day, police arrested 6-year-old Jose Enrique Abu. He had a prior criminal record, and more importantly, he was the same man who had been detained in 2016 as a suspect in Diana's case, but was released after his wife vouched for his whereabouts. Now, the police brought him in for further questioning, and this time, the truth began to unravel. Under renewed pressure, Jose Enrique's wife confessed that her original statement had been false. Her husband had not been home the night Diana went missing. In fact, he hadn't returned until 4 a.m. the next morning. Initially, Jose Enrique claimed that he accidentally hit Diana with his car and, panicked by the thought of going to prison, had disposed of her body. But that wasn't the full truth. He later changed his story, admitting to kidnapping and murdering the young woman, according to his confession. He had gone to the beach, searching for gasoline from abandoned vehicles. That's where he encountered Diana. He tried to force her into a sexual act. When she resisted, he strangled her. This disturbing admission finally shed light on a case that had tormented Diana's family and gripped the public for nearly 500 days. From the beginning, Diana's disappearance had attracted heavy media attention, some of it damaging. Her parents were subjected to waves of baseless rumors that not only deepened their trauma, but also hindered the investigation. Still, despite the setbacks and public scrutiny, investigators remained focused. Their persistence eventually paid off. In January 2018, after finally revealing the location of her body, Jose Enrique led police to a well inside an abandoned warehouse. Diana's remains were recovered, allowing her loved ones to finally lay her to rest. Jose Enrique was later sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. Transition to new case now. Investigators, it's time to turn our focus to another case, one marked by love, mystery, and a vanishing newlywed. This is the story of George Smith. George was born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut. He came from a warm and close-knit family. His father, George Smith Sr., owned a beloved local liquor store, a business that brought joy to the entire family. After earning his business degree from Babson College in 2000, George spent a few years working in Boston as a data mining analyst, but his heart eventually led him home, where he decided to help his family run the store and prepare to one day take it over. In 2002, during a reunion with friends, George met Jennifer Hagel, a Connecticut native who had just started her career as an elementary school teacher. George was immediately drawn to her warm personality and strong ambition. Their connection blossomed quickly, and by 2005, the couple tied the knot in a breathtaking beachside ceremony at Castle Hill in Newport, Rhode Island. To celebrate their marriage, the couple set off on a European honeymoon cruise, a journey that began in Barcelona on June 29th, with stops planned along the stunning coasts of France and Italy. Aboard the cruise ship, George and Jennifer befriended another couple, as well as a young Californian named Josh Askin. Josh, just 20 years old, had a quick wit and easy charm, and soon became close with the newlyweds. On July 1st, while docked off the coast of Italy, the group spent the day exploring on land. By July 4th, they found themselves wandering the streets of the Greek island of Mykonos, swimming in crystal-clear waters, sampling local dishes, and enjoying every moment together. That evening, after a romantic dinner, the group decided to continue the festivities aboard the ship. George and Josh headed to the casino to play craps, while Jennifer joined a poker table nearby. By the end of the night, George and Jennifer had lost a significant amount of money, but they laughed it off and didn't let it ruin the mood. After the casino closed, the celebration didn't end. The group returned to the ship's decks to keep the night alive. According to surveillance footage, around 2:30 a.m. on July 5th, George was seen leaving the casino. What happened after that remains a mystery. By morning, George was gone. Ship staff began searching the area. George's cabin showed signs of a struggle, with blood and strange footprints found beneath the cabin's balcony window. Jennifer was nowhere to be found. Panic spread throughout the cruise ship as rumors and fears mounted. The crew quickly locked down sections of the ship, restricting passenger access, while they launched a full-scale search for the missing newlywed. Had George fallen? Was he pushed? Or did something far more sinister take place that night? The mystery of George Smith's disappearance would go on to haunt investigators, the media, and his family for years to come. The senior officer quickly took charge of the investigation and proceeded to George and Jennifer's stateroom to collect more information. Based on initial findings, authorities suspected that George might have fallen overboard. Meanwhile, a search for him continued on the opposite side of the ship. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was located in the ship's spa, where she was receiving a pre-booked massage. She appeared both surprised and concerned when questioned, claiming she had no idea where her husband was and hadn't seen him since the night before. According to Jennifer, she had woken up to find George missing, but assumed he was either with friends or staying in another cabin. Without much concern, she headed to her spa appointment around noon. Turkish authorities boarded the ship to begin a formal investigation into George's disappearance. The captain addressed the passengers, assuring them that the investigation was a necessary step and hoping it would be resolved quickly. The police began their inquiry by interviewing Jennifer. She appeared visibly distressed and claimed to have limited knowledge about her husband's whereabouts. She repeated what she'd told others, that the last time she saw George was the night before, and that Royal Caribbean staff had informed her he may have fallen overboard. But a chilling discovery raised new concerns. Blood was found on the ship's exterior awning, suggesting something far more sinister may have happened. Investigators began to suspect foul play. Jennifer's agitated state and apparent lack of concern or knowledge about her husband's disappearance made her an early person of interest. Cabin 962. The couple's stateroom was examined and found to be in disarray, hinting at a possible struggle. Small drops of blood were found on the bathroom carpet and towels, along with fingerprints on the balcony railing. 2 additional bloodstains, each roughly 2 centimeters long, were discovered on the bed linens. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the blood belonged to George. George's disappearance remained deeply suspicious. Investigators noted a chair on the balcony positioned near the railing, suggesting someone may have sat or been seated there. Scratches and marks on the railing implied physical contact, perhaps a struggle or a fall. But with the ship's railings being significantly high, combined with blood both inside the cabin and on the exterior awning, a fall seemed unlikely. The evidence pointed more toward violence than accident. Authorities then turned their focus to the group George and Jennifer had spent the evening with. It was reported that both had been drinking heavily, and George in particular had become severely intoxicated. Some of the group claimed they helped him back to his cabin, removed his shoes, and left him in bed alone, assuming Jennifer would return shortly thereafter. However, no one could definitively confirm Jennifer's whereabouts. Notably, Josh Askin's statement to investigators contained contradictions. He claimed that Jennifer had left the group to accompany a casino employee named Lloyd, a version that didn't align with the assumption that she had returned to the cabin. Josh and Jennifer were rumored to have shared strong feelings for one another, and both had expressed mixed emotions toward George in the past. Security footage later challenged their story. At 3:30 a.m., Jennifer was seen leaving the area with new acquaintances, while George remained behind. Data from Lloyd's keycard confirmed he returned to his own cabin at 3:25 a.m., a timeline corroborated by his girlfriend, further casting doubt on Josh's version of events. As investigators followed the emerging trail, more questions surfaced. Elsewhere, on the ship, a young man named Greg Rosenberg was vacationing with his cousin Zach Rosenberg and close friend Rostislav Kaufman. All 3 were American citizens of Russian descent and lived in New York City. Greg had spent the earlier part of the night at the casino with Jennifer, where they played poker and socialized. After the casino closed around 2:30 a.m., the group, now including George and others, continued partying at the ship's disco, Lloyd Boda. The casino manager was also seen mingling with the group. By then, most of the passengers had consumed large amounts of alcohol and were visibly intoxicated. According to ship regulations, staff were instructed to stop serving alcohol to passengers behaving inappropriately or excessively drunk. Denied more drinks. The group decided to consume a bottle of absinthe they had purchased earlier during a stop in Mykonos, despite the cruise line's ban on outside alcohol. Josh Askin retrieved the absinthe, a potent spirit with over 70% alcohol content. George reportedly helped conceal the bottle by hiding it in his shorts. A vigilant janitor, however, spotted the group passing the bottle around, an incident later included in the investigation file. Jennifer, initially composed, also began showing signs of extreme intoxication. She staggered around and at one point leaned on Lloyd for balance. Some saw this as flirtation, while others believed she was simply trying to steady herself. Sometime during the early morning hours, George and Jennifer had a public argument. Witnesses differed on whether it was playful or serious. At one point, Jennifer reportedly slapped George, but again, it was unclear whether it was out of anger or jest. Jennifer was last seen leaving the disco at around 3:30 a.m., stumbling and heavily intoxicated. George stayed behind with the remaining group. The janitor noticed Jennifer's unsteady walk and helped her to the elevator. Once she reached her deck, she turned right away from her stateroom, which was located to the left. She was later found asleep in a hallway far from her cabin. 2 security guards and a female officer used a wheelchair to return her to her room. The time was 4:52 a.m. when they arrived. George was not there. The curtains covering the balcony doors were drawn shut and undisturbed. What happened in the time between Jennifer's departure from the disco and her return to the cabin? Why was George missing, and how did blood end up both inside the room and on the ship's awning? The investigation was only beginning, but the deeper authorities looked, the more sinister the case became. Despite the wind raising questions about whether George Smith may have stepped onto the balcony by himself after his friends left him in bed, what happened next remains shrouded in mystery. Deputy Chief of Police Chit Heyman and his wife were staying in a neighboring cabin. At around 4 a.m., they were jolted awake by loud noises coming from George's stateroom, number 9062. Heyman reported hearing what sounded like an argument. He called guest services and even shouted through the wall in an attempt to quiet the disturbance. The noise subsided for a moment, only to resume minutes later. This time, it escalated into a heated exchange out on the balcony. Someone was heard saying goodnight over and over again, as if trying to get people to leave. Then came the sound of furniture scraping, followed by a loud thud, like something or someone had fallen. Heyman opened his door to investigate and saw 3 unidentified men in the hallway. Other passengers also later reported hearing a loud noise, something that sounded like a body hitting the ship's metal canopy, followed by a woman's scream. Still, no one could conclusively say whether a woman had been in George's cabin at the time. According to witness reports, 4 young men had entered George's stateroom, but only 3 were seen leaving. That discrepancy sparked theories that one man may have stayed behind, possibly searching for cash. George and Jennifer, the newlyweds, had been seen earlier boasting about a large casino win. Some speculated they were carrying tens of thousands of dollars in cash, possibly wedding gifts, possibly winnings. George had been wearing a high-end Breitling watch, and Jennifer's engagement ring was equally valuable. It's not hard to imagine that word may have spread, and someone may have come looking. The failed robbery theory gained traction, but there were inconsistencies. The 3 young men, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav, claimed they were in a different cabin just minutes after Heyman spotted them outside George's door. But keycard records show they accessed George's stateroom at 4:05 a.m. Crucially, there's no record of them entering again after that dot. That inconsistency gave rise to yet another theory, that George's drunken state wasn't solely due to alcohol. While he and Jennifer appeared relatively sober when they left the casino at around 2:30 a.m. By 3:30, they were unable to return to their cabin unaided. Some suspect they may have been drugged. Other casino guests remembered the couple openly discussing their wealth. That, combined with their visible signs of inebriation, may have made them easy targets. 2 central theories eventually emerged. The first, George may have been attacked during an attempted theft. Bloodstains on the bedsheets suggest a struggle, possibly over his expensive watch. The second, that George fell overboard in a drunken, drug-induced accident, possibly during a fight on the balcony. Investigators considered whether he'd consumed absinthe, a strong alcoholic drink made from wormwood, which contains thujone, a chemical once believed to cause hallucinations, but toxicology experts dismissed that theory. Absinthe, legally sold in Europe, where George had bought his, has such a low thujone content that it's virtually incapable of causing hallucinations unless it's a black market variant with dangerously high levels. As the investigation deepened, so did the suspicion. The FBI interviewed several people, including Jennifer and Lloyd B. Both passed their polygraph tests, but Josh Askin, one of the young men last seen near George's cabin, failed his polygraph. Then came the most disturbing discovery, a videotape. In it, 3 men, including 2 of the Russian men from the group, could be heard laughing and making cryptic jokes. One comment stood out: "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute." The FBI believed the tape could be tied to George's disappearance. In 2009, The FBI re-interviewed Greg, Zach, Rostislav, and Josh Askin, but their answers were evasive. Rosenberg, in particular, claimed they had ordered food to their room that night, offering an alibi for the others, but cruise ship records showed otherwise. Their cabin had been flagged, room service was blocked. Staff were explicitly told not to serve them that evening. Greg couldn't say who ordered the food. The inconsistencies piled up. Even accounts of George and Jennifer's relationship varied wildly. Greg claimed their group had been too drunk to observe anything clearly, but Josh told investigators that Greg had left the room after ordering food, a statement Greg denied. Then, another chilling twist. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered. His case remains unsolved. Authorities haven't ruled out a potential connection to George's disappearance. In the years since George's mysterious vanishing, questions have only multiplied. Even the behavior of his family has come under scrutiny. But one thing remains constant: their pursuit of justice. The Smith family pressed the FBI to keep the investigation alive. Eventually, the case was moved from the FBI's Connecticut office to New York. The family offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and urged the public to boycott the cruise line, Royal Caribbean, until answers were found. Nearly 2 decades have passed, but for those who knew George, the pain remains fresh and the silence around what happened that night still deafening. The company, many believed, was more concerned with protecting its profits than uncovering the truth. This incident not only sparked widespread controversy but also deeply strained the relationship between George's grieving parents and his young wife, Jennifer. Her behavior in the aftermath was heavily scrutinized. Many found her composure unusual and unsettling. Jennifer claimed she was acting under the instructions of FBI agents, following every directive they gave her. But her reluctance to disclose more information only fueled suspicion. 2. George's family, desperate for truth and justice. Jennifer's decision to accept a $1 million settlement from the cruise line felt like a betrayal. It gave the appearance that she was prioritizing closure over accountability, or worse, hiding something. Adding to their frustration, the Turkish authorities' investigation lacked transparency. Jennifer's seemingly quick acceptance of the settlement only reinforced the family's fear that she wasn't committed to finding out what really happened to George. Jennifer, however, insists her memory of that night ends at around 2:30 a.m. She claims she had no recollection of cruise staff later escorting her back to her cabin, which they reportedly did. Disillusioned by the official investigation, George's family decided to pursue their own answers. They enlisted renowned forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee to conduct an independent review of the evidence, specifically the ship's cabin and balcony where George was last seen. Dr. Lee's analysis revealed that the height of the balcony made it difficult to determine whether George had fallen accidentally, been pushed, or even climbed over in a disoriented state. Dr. Lee intended to conduct a fall simulation experiment to better understand the mechanics of George's death. However, the cruise line owner refused to grant permission, yet another obstacle the family believed deliberately placed in their path to the truth. While Dr. Lee's private investigations were thorough, their findings were never released to the public. Meanwhile, the FBI launched its own investigation, but much of what they uncovered remained classified. The focus of the inquiry soon narrowed for young men who had been with George that night. Along with 3 Russian nationals, Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rostislav Kaufman, their testimonies, however, clashed with those of other witnesses, adding layers of confusion to an already murky case. Initially, Jennifer herself was considered a suspect, but she was eventually cleared. Still, the Smith family pushed forward with legal action, increasing the scope of their lawsuit against the cruise company. The financial settlement they ultimately received helped them gain access to previously sealed investigative documents, including witness statements and internal findings. As for Jennifer, she moved forward with her life. She devoted herself to charitable work in George's memory, and eventually remarried. But George's family still grieves without closure. With his body never recovered and no grave to visit, their suffering remains raw. Though the case was officially closed and his death ruled an accident, the Smiths continue to hope that one day the full truth will be known. Now, let's turn to another haunting story, this time from Bangladesh. This is the tragic case of Shibal Sadikrio, an 18-year-old who paid the ultimate price for his honesty. Born in the historic port city of Chattogram, Bangladesh, Sadik was the only child of Sheikh, a truck driver, and Nidor, a housewife. Despite his family's poverty, Sadik was full of ambition and had a deep passion for his studies. To fund his education and support his household, Sadik began working at a local poultry farm from a young age. His hard work quickly paid off. He was promoted from a regular worker to manager, an unusual achievement for someone his age. Yet Sadik remained humble and disciplined. His intelligence and sense of responsibility earned him the respect of his co-workers, most of whom were 5 to 6 years older. He made sure everyone worked honestly, even if that sometimes led to friction. But Sadik never let disputes linger. He kept to a strict routine: work, study, and home, always returning before nightfall. On the morning of August 28, 2023, everything seemed normal. Sadik went to work as usual, but that evening, he didn't return home. At first, his parents assumed he had been asked to handle something urgent at the farm, but as the hours passed, worry set in. Between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, they tried calling him multiple times. No response. That was unlike him. Still, they remained hopeful. By the next morning, their son was still missing. Desperate, they tried calling the poultry farm owner. His phone was also unreachable. The family searched around the area and questioned neighbors and farm workers, but no one knew anything. Then, on the morning of August 29th, they finally received a call from Sadik's number. For a moment, they were relieved until they heard his voice. Sadik sounded panicked. He told his mother he had been kidnapped and had been held inside a car for over 12 hours. He whispered that his captors were beating him and that he was speaking in secret. But before he could say more, the call abruptly ended. The line went dead. Sadik's parents now knew their son was in grave danger, and this was only the beginning of a heartbreaking and infuriating journey in search of justice. Sadik, single quotes, S parents, were growing increasingly worried. His mother Nahar had been trying to call him for days, but now, someone was actively disconnecting the calls. Just as she was about to go to the police, her phone rang again. It was from Sadik's number, but this time, it wasn't her son. A stranger's voice came through. The man claimed they had Sadik in their custody. If the family wanted to see him alive again, they would need to pay 1.5 million Bangladeshi taka. The caller said they'd contact them again with instructions on where to deliver the money. Sadik's family was devastated. They didn't even have 100,000 taka to their name. But for their only son, they began desperately gathering money, reaching out to neighbors, relatives, and anyone who could help. From August 28th to the 31st, they scrambled, but still couldn't come up with more than 200,000 taka. On August 31st, the kidnappers called again. Sadik's parents pleaded with them, saying they simply couldn't gather that much money. Surprisingly, the kidnappers agreed to lower the demand. They'd settle for 200,000 taka. It seemed they already knew the family's financial situation. Even with the reduced ransom, Sadik's parents had to borrow from shopkeepers and well-wishers to meet the amount. After 3 days of relentless effort, they finally had the money. Now, all they could do was wait for the next call. That call came on September 4th. The kidnappers told Sadik's father to meet them at the Bandar Band district headquarters and warned him not to involve the police. If he did, they said, Sadik would be killed. Terrified, Sadik's father obeyed. He went to the meeting point alone, money in hand. 2 masked men appeared. They said little, took the ransom, and told him not to worry. Sadek would reach home. Before he did, with a heart full of hope, Sadek's father rushed back. But when he got home, Sadek wasn't there. His wife was waiting, anxious. When he told her what happened, she grew even more distressed. The two of them waited at the door. 4 hours, but their son never came. Night fell. Then another day passed. Still, there was no sign of Sadek. By now, even their relatives had begun to panic. One of them urged Sadek's father, Shafiq, to go to the police. But Shafiq hesitated. He was still haunted by the kidnappers' threats. Then, on September 7th, against his fear, Shafiq dialed his son's number. No one picked up. It had been over 10 days since Sadek vanished. They could no longer wait. That evening, Sadek's parents walked into the local police station and told them everything. At first, the police were furious they hadn't come sooner, but when they heard about the threats, their anger turned to sympathy. They understood the fear these parents had been living with. Immediately, an investigation was launched. Officers looked into Sadek's background, his behavior, his circle, any possible enemies. But everything they found painted him as a decent, quiet young man. No known conflicts, no trouble. Then Sadek's mother remembered something, a fight her son had mentioned. It happened at the poultry farm where he worked. She told police. Officers went straight to the farm. They detained 6 workers for questioning. One by one, they were interrogated. At first, all of them denied involvement. But under pressure, 4 of the boys broke down and confessed. Their names were Omangching Marma, Suing Marma, Ainam Marma, and Yukim Marma. The police asked them where Sadek was, but none of them said a word. Days passed. Eventually, after more interrogation, the suspects revealed 2 more accomplices and finally admitted what had happened. On the night of August 28th, as Sadek was walking home, they abducted him. It was meant to be payback for a petty dispute. Their plan was to rough him up, then demand money from his parents in exchange for his release. Everything was going according to plan until Sadek saw the faces of 2 of them. That changed everything. They knew he could now identify them. They couldn't risk letting him go, so they made a brutal decision. They took a knife and began attacking Sadek again, from his face to his feet. He bled out and died on the spot. What had begun as a planned ransom turned into a cold-blooded murder. When police asked where the body was, the boys said they had dismembered Sadiq and thrown his remains across a nearby hill. Officers searched the location. Scattered body parts were found, but then, farther away, they discovered a nearly whole body. Its face, however, had been viciously mutilated, beyond recognition. Sadek's parents, who had held on to hope for so many days, were now left shattered. The case is now being pursued as a murder investigation. Police initially couldn't confirm whether the body they had discovered belonged to Sadek or someone else. But after examining the clothes, body height, and other physical details, investigators concluded that it was, in fact, Sadek. His family later confirmed the identification. Authorities had already arrested the suspects on murder charges. While in custody, Wang Chingara made shocking confessions in connection with Sadek's death. He claimed that he and Sadek had once shared a close friendship, but that 2 months earlier, they had a falling out over a personal issue. Consumed by the desire for revenge, Chingara admitted to killing Sadek with his own hands. In a horrifying revelation, he also confessed to eating parts of Sadek's body after the murder. As soon as these gruesome details were made public, protests erupted across the country. The public was outraged. On the evening of September 11th, while police were escorting the accused, an angry crowd intercepted them. They forcefully seized Wang Chingara from police custody and beat him to death on the spot, delivering their own brutal form of justice. Before a court could pass sentence, the other accused were only narrowly saved by the police and placed behind bars. Since then, there have been no new developments in the case. If any updates arise, I'll be sure to share them through a community post on my channel. For Sadic's parents, the pain is immeasurable. They lost a beloved son, someone who was dedicated to his family and deeply committed to building a future. And with that, the Shibboleth Radoy case reaches its tragic conclusion. Now, we turn to another heartbreaking story, the case of 14-year-old Rina Verk. On November 14, 1997, Rina's vibrant young life came to a tragic end. That night, a group of her peers lured her to a party. But beneath the surface of that invitation lay a disturbing and deliberate plot. When she failed to return home, her family grew alarmed. They reported her missing, but due to her troubled history and past runaway attempts, police were slow to act. Eventually, Rina's lifeless body was discovered. What investigators uncovered would shock the nation. Rina Verk was born on March 10, 1983, in Saanich, a district municipality on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. Her family traced its roots to India. Her mother, Sumansu, came from an Indo-Canadian background, while her father, Manjit, had immigrated from India. The family had converted from Hinduism to become Jehovah's Witnesses, adopting a faith that set them apart, even within the Indo-Canadian community, where cultural divisions were already prominent. Growing up, Rina struggled to fit in. At school, she was frequently bullied for her appearance. Her weight, brown skin, and unique features made her stand out in a predominantly white environment. On top of that, her strict religious upbringing clashed with the more relaxed lifestyle of her peers. Rina craved acceptance, but instead, she was often made to feel like an outsider. The bullying took its toll. When her parents learned how long it had been happening, they grew concerned about her mental health, fearing she might be slipping into depression. In May 1994, the family moved, and Rina switched schools. For a brief time, things improved. She seemed happier and even made a close friend, but that friendship didn't last. When her new friend eventually turned away, the cycle of rejection and bullying started again. By 1996, Rina had entered middle school and was desperate to belong. She gravitated toward a group of popular kids who lived a lifestyle she envied, drinking and defying their parents. For Rina, this group offered something her home life did not: freedom. Her parents strongly disapproved of this crowd, which only intensified her rebellious behavior. Rina's father recalled telling her, "Bad associations spoil useful habits." But at 13, Rina was already spiraling. That same year, a friend gave her a disturbing suggestion. If she told the police her parents were abusing her, she could enter foster care. Acting on this, Rina falsely accused her parents of physical abuse. While the allegations didn't hold up, she was temporarily placed with her grandparents, who believed her story. In 1997, things took an even darker turn. Rina falsely accused her father of sexually assaulting her. He was arrested and jailed while awaiting trial. But later, Rina confessed to fabricating the entire story. The charges were dropped, but the emotional damage lingered. Unhappy living with her grandparents, Rina was placed in a foster home, where she tried to fit in with her new peers. She began mimicking their behavior, smoking, and even falsely claiming gang affiliations to appear more accepted. But life in foster care didn't live up to her expectations. She still had rules, still had curfews. So, she apologized to her parents and returned home only to leave again shortly after. Bouncing between youth shelters and foster homes, these months revealed a troubling pattern. Rina was desperate to find where she belonged. Her constant moves, strained family ties, and confrontations with social workers painted a picture of a deeply conflicted teenager. She rejected her parents' conservative beliefs and rules, believing they didn't understand the modern world. She wanted to be part of middle school became the most emotionally turbulent time of her short life. In his 2008 book Rina, A Father's Story, Manjit Verk shared the anguish his family endured. expressing the helplessness they felt as their daughter slipped further away. He believed Rena manipulated those around her, family, friends, and social workers, and lamented that few people ever gave his side of the story a fair hearing. Rena's story, a tragic pursuit of belonging. Rena Verk was just 14 years old when her longing for acceptance led her into the arms of those who would ultimately betray her. Eager to be seen and valued by the very peers who had once rejected her, Rena clung to the hope that she was finally being welcomed. So when she received an invitation to a party on November 14, 1997, she likely felt a surge of excitement. This was her chance to socialize with the cool crowd. The gathering began as an overnight hangout near a Saanich school where her parents lived, but after police dispersed the group, the party relocated to the Craigflower Bridge, a decision that would mark the final chapter of Rena's life. At 10:40 p.m., just 20 minutes before her curfew, Rena called her parents to let them know she was heading home. It would be the last time they ever spoke to their daughter. At Craigflower Bridge, a group of teenagers were drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. Among them were members of a local girl gang known as the Shoreline Six. Without warning, several girls turned on Rena. They brutally beat her, stubbed a lit cigarette on her forehead, and even attempted to set her hair on fire. The violence only ended when one of the girls finally ordered the others to stop. Witnesses later recalled that the assault seemed entirely unprovoked. Traumatized but alive, Rena attempted to flee and head home. But to other teens, 15-year-old Kelly Ellard and 16-year-old Warren Glowatsky chased her down. They dragged her to a more isolated spot on the other side of the bridge. There, the attack resumed with even more force. Rena was punched and kicked repeatedly before her head was forcibly held underwater until she stopped moving. Afterward, they stripped her of her sweater and shoes and pushed her lifeless body into the water. When Rena missed her curfew, her parents initially assumed she had stayed with her grandparents, but by morning, when she failed to show up at her group home either, panic began to set in. A call to one of Rena's friends confirmed their worst fears. Rena had still been at the party when the friend left around 11 p.m. Her family reported her missing the next day, but due to Rena's past history of running away, police were slow to act. Meanwhile, rumors of a savage beating and a body in the nearby gorge waterway circulated throughout Central Intermediate School, where some of the teens involved were students. Despite these whispers, none of the teachers or students initially reported anything to the authorities. It wasn't until a week later that a student witness finally stepped forward, telling police that she had seen Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowatsky follow Rena after the first attack. This account broke the silence and launched a full investigation. On November 21, 1997, Glowatsky and Ellard were arrested and charged with murder and aggravated assault. The girls from the Shoreline Six, protected under Canada's Young Offenders Act, faced aggravated assault charges, but their identities remained shielded from the public. The following day, a police helicopter searched the Craigflower Bridge area. Nothing was spotted from the air, but a ground search later revealed a body hidden in dense weeds. It was Rena Verk. A forensic pathologist ruled drowning as the cause of death, though Rena had suffered such severe head injuries that they alone could have been fatal. She died wearing the pain of violence and betrayal at just 14 years old. In February 1998, the 6 girls involved in the initial assault were tried in youth court. 3 pleaded guilty to assault, causing bodily harm. The other 3 went to trial and were convicted of the same offense. Their sentences ranged from a 60-day conditional sentence to 1 year in jail, but the murder charges against Ellard and Glowatsky would follow a different legal path. Warren Glowatsky, a life of displacement. Warren Glowatsky had a troubled past. Raised without his alcoholic mother and abandoned by his father, he had been living with a friend when the murder occurred. In April 1999, his trial began. By June, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Since he was a minor at the time, he became eligible for parole after 7 years. While incarcerated, Warren discovered his Metis heritage and began participating in restorative justice practices. He met with Rena's family and expressed deep remorse. In July 2006, he was granted unescorted temporary absences. He was released on full parole in June 2010, with no opposition from Rena's family, who believed his remorse was sincere. Kelly Ellard, the reluctant defendant unlike Glowatsky, Kelly Ellard came from a more stable family that supported her throughout the trial. She was 15 when she helped end Rena's life. Despite her lawyer's attempts to keep her in youth court, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the violence of the crime and her lack of remorse warranted an adult trial. In March 2000, she was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life. But in January 2003, the conviction was overturned due to an unfair trial. While out on bail, awaiting a retrial, Ellard was charged with assault after attacking a 58-year-old woman in a Vancouver park. Her bail was revoked, and she was returned to custody. During her 2004 retrial, witnesses testified that Kelly had bragged about killing Rena. Glowatsky also claimed he saw Ellard hold Rena underwater, but her defense tried to undermine his credibility by pointing out inconsistencies in his earlier statements. Ellard admitted to participating in the attack, but denied murdering Rena. She claimed she had only acted to defend her friends, believing Rena was going to harm them. In court, she expressed bitterness and resignation rather than remorse, telling the jury, "I'm obviously going to be convicted. You've got what you want. My life is ruined." She continued to deny direct responsibility for Rena's death, shifting blame onto Glowatsky and 2 other girls. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury was deadlocked. No verdict could be reached. After a mistrial was declared in July 2004, Kelly Ellard faced a new trial in February 2005, with Warren Glowatsky once again serving as the key witness. He reaffirmed his testimony, stating that both he and Ellard had assaulted Rena Verk, leaving her unconscious and floating in the water. On April 12, 2005, Ellard was convicted for the second time of second-degree murder. She received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 7 years. However, in September 2008, the British Columbia Court of Appeal overturned her conviction, citing that the judge in her third trial had given incorrect instructions to the jury regarding the interpretation of testimony. This prolonged legal saga finally concluded in June 2009, when the Supreme Court of Canada upheld Ellard's second-degree murder conviction, putting an end to years of legal uncertainty. By 2017, Ellard was granted day parole. 2 years later, in 2019, she was granted additional privileges, including overnight leaves and extended day parole. The decision drew significant public attention, and on July 14, 2020, it became known that Ellard, who had once faced a life sentence, was now living on day parole. During her time outside prison, Ellard changed her name to Carrie Sim. She started a family with her spouse and had 2 children. She followed the conditions of her parole, strictly avoiding drugs and alcohol, and maintaining zero contact with Rena's family. But even as years passed, one troubling question remained. Why? Why would a group of teenagers beat Rena so viciously that it ended in murder? One possible motive was revenge. Rena had previously lived in a group home with 2 of the girls involved in the assault, and they accused her of stealing a phone book and spreading rumors by making calls. Another girl claimed she was angry with Rena for allegedly stealing her boyfriend in the year 2000. Rena's parents filed a civil lawsuit not only against the teenagers involved, but also against the British Columbia government and other responsible entities. Rena's father later said, "Society doesn't hold people accountable for their actions. This is one way to make them responsible." In 2012, Rena's mother opened up about her daughter's death and the devastating toll bullying can take. She shared, "I'm finding that now I'm feeling more of the impact of losing Rena. The emotions and feelings Actually, I'm struggling more now, and missing her more. Determined to bring about change, Rena's parents launched anti-bullying campaigns and promoted inclusion programs. Their efforts led the government to implement official anti-bullying measures in schools. In 2009, they were awarded the Anthony J. Holm Award of Distinction for their outstanding work in crime prevention and community safety. What Rena endured in her final hours was horrifying, and while she may have made mistakes, like any teenager, yearning to fit in, they in no way justified the brutality she faced. Despite the false accusations and societal blame, her family continued to love her deeply. Standing by her memory with unwavering strength, our hearts go out to Rena and the family she left behind. Transition into the next case. Hello friends, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we'll be looking into another heartbreaking case, the murder of Sarah Everard. Sarah Everard was born in June 1987 to Jeremy and Susan Everard in York, England. Her father was a university professor of electronics, and her mother worked in charity. Sarah was the youngest of 3 children, growing up alongside her siblings James and Catherine in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Heslington area. Childhood friends remember her playing in the street, vibrant, friendly, and full of life. She attended Fulford School and later earned a degree in human geography from Durham University in 2008. Professionally, Sarah worked as an account executive and senior account manager in various firms, eventually becoming a digital account director at McCormack & Morrison, while also freelancing with the Flipside Group. Everything changed on the evening of March 3, 2021. Sarah was walking home from a friend's house near Clapham Common to her home in Brixton Hill. The journey should have taken her less than an hour, but she never arrived. The following day, her boyfriend reported her missing after she failed to show up or respond to messages. It was completely out of character for Sarah, who was always in close contact with loved ones. A large-scale search operation was immediately launched. Hundreds of police officers and volunteers scoured areas between Clapham and Brixton parks, woodlands, and open spaces. CCTV footage placed Sarah walking alone along the A205 Poinders Road towards Tulse Hill, just south of Brixton. She had spoken to her boyfriend on the phone around 9:30 p.m. for about 15 minutes, agreeing to meet the next day. That would be the last time anyone heard from her. Authorities released photos and descriptions of her last known appearance. She was wearing a green rain jacket, navy blue pants with a white diamond pattern, turquoise sneakers, green earphones, and a white beanie hat. The investigation, led by the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime Command, involved over 120 officers. They deployed helicopters, sniffer dogs, forensic teams, and received more than 120 public tips. Doorbell footage and dashcam videos played a vital role in narrowing the timeline. But despite these efforts, the case would soon reveal something even more terrifying. The person responsible for Sarah's disappearance was someone the public had trusted to protect them. Authorities urged anyone with relevant dashcam or CCTV footage to come forward. Sniffer dogs were deployed to search gardens, streets, and surrounding areas near Sarah Everard's presumed route home, including the nearby Oaklands estate. Officers also scoured a pond in Clapham Common and checked drains along the A205. Investigators soon uncovered crucial CCTV footage showing a man later identified as Wayne Couzens, and officer from the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command interacting with Sarah Everard on 2 occasions. The footage showed the two standing beside a rented white Vauxhall Astra, and the vehicle's license plate quickly led authorities to uncover more. On February 28, 2021, Couzens had reserved the Vauxhall from a rental company in Dover. On March 3, after finishing a 12-hour shift at the U.S. Embassy in London, he traveled to Kent to collect the vehicle. He then returned to London, where surveillance cameras recorded him in Earl's Court and on Battersea Bridge around the time Sarah went missing. Couzens was back in Clapham, He parked the rented car on the pavement outside Pointer's Court, stopped. Everard showed his police-warrant card, and handcuffed her. CCTV and ANPR data confirmed their movements. Sarah had entered the car, and Cousins drove her to Kent. The car's journey was tracked retrospectively using CCTV and electronic monitoring. At one point, the two transferred into Cousins' personal seat vehicle. He then drove to Hodes Wood, near Ashford, where his car was seen on CCTV between 3:22 and 6:32 a.m. Later, he returned to Dover, switched back to the rental vehicle, and returned it. On March 9th, the Metropolitan Police arrested Cousins and a woman at an address in Kent. The woman was later released without charge. Meanwhile, detectives learned that Cousins had recently told colleagues he was suffering from stress and no longer wished to carry a firearm. Further investigation revealed that Cousins had filled a petrol container at a service station in Whitfield before driving once again to Hodes Wood. At 12:37 p.m., he was seen on CCTV. That same day, he called in sick to work and handed in his equipment, including his police belt and handcuffs, raising immediate red flags. Police began a detailed search of Hodes Wood and discovered human remains in a large builder's bag, about 100 meters from a plot of land owned by The body was later confirmed to be Sarah Everard through dental records. Officers also searched a disused body repair garage, previously owned by Cousins' family, located atop the White Cliffs of Dover. Under interrogation, Cousins admitted to several disturbing acts. His mobile phone data placed him in Clapham at the time of Sarah's disappearance. He confessed to using his police duty belt to strangle her and then sexually assault her. He later burned her body inside an old refrigerator he had purchased. He also admitted to buying 2 large builder's bags from B&Q and using one of them to dispose of Sarah's remains in a pond at Hodes Wood. He then drove to Sandwich, Kent, where he disposed of Sarah's phone in a watercourse. Police divers were deployed, and a large area of the rope walk in Sandwich was cordoned off for search efforts. Sarah's tragic disappearance and the horrifying discovery of her remains sparked a wave of grief and solidarity. People from all walks of life came together to demand justice and real change. Sarah was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her loss left a devastating void in the lives of those who loved her. The post-mortem confirmed that she had died from compression of the neck. The Crown Prosecution Service charged Cousins with her kidnapping and murder. He first appeared at Westminster Magistrates' Court and was then remanded to the Old Bailey from Belmarsh Prison. Cousins pleaded guilty to kidnap and sexual assault and admitted responsibility for Sarah's death. On September 30th, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order. Justice Fulford emphasized that Cousins' abuse of his position as a police officer was a key factor in the severity of the punishment. Cousins later tried to appeal his sentence, but the Court of Appeal rejected it. As of December 2021, he remained incarcerated at HM Prison Franklin in County Durham. He was also charged with 4 counts of indecent exposure for incidents dating back to January and February 2021. He pleaded guilty to 3 additional incidents in Kent from 2020 and 2021. Sarah Everard's story reignited conversations about women's safety, leading to campaigns and advocacy efforts demanding safer streets and greater accountability. Her legacy is one of strength, unity, and transformation, reminder that we must stand against violence, protect women's rights, and work toward a future where everyone can live without fear. John Parker was more than just a successful salesman. He was a mentor and source of inspiration to the salespeople around him. His energy, vision, and confidence gave others something to aspire to. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a bold and charismatic young woman from a low-income family in Texas. Born in October 1969, Judy exuded confidence well beyond her years. Despite John not actively recruiting at the time, Judy convinced him she had what it took to excel in sales. Her determination paid off, though just 20. Judy had already experienced more than most married at 14 with her parents' consent, divorced, and the mother of 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks. Impressed by her persistence and charm, John not only brought her into his team, but also took her under his wing as a mentor in the world of vacuum cleaner sales. But their relationship quickly deepened beyond business. Judy soon captured John's heart, and the two began a romantic relationship. John's career flourished. With his reputation as a dynamic salesman and trainer on the rise, he decided to branch out on his own. He launched a sales and service business for Kirby vacuum cleaners in Michigan and began hosting training seminars where he shared his personal techniques and infectious energy with up-and-coming salespeople. His business boomed, and John always gave credit where it was due. He believed Judy's unwavering support was a cornerstone of his success. In 1992, with their professional and personal lives firmly intertwined, John and Judy got married. Together, they built a life rooted in ambition and results. They had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, and moved into better neighborhoods as their fortunes grew. Their children enjoyed good schools, luxury vehicles, and regular vacations. At first, John got along well with Judy's older children. Christina was a sweet, gentle girl. Daniel, though, was a handful, hyperactive, and mischievous. As time passed, problems began to surface. Christina started spending time with peers who had troubling behavior. Rumors of underage drinking and even drug use began to circulate. Daniel, just 13, exhibited signs of deep frustration and lack of guidance. One day, he stole John's car, recklessly speeding through the neighborhood and smashing into several mailbox posts. The next morning, John personally visited each homeowner, offering to pay for the damage and pleading with them not to involve the police. Not long after, he was summoned to Daniel's school due to the boy's continued behavioral issues. That meeting ended poorly, with John resorting to physical discipline, an act that introduced serious strain into the household dynamic. 9 years into their relationship, Judy decided it was time to return to her roots. The family visited her hometown of Humble, Texas, where she reconnected with one of her brothers. It was there that she privately confessed her marriage was crumbling. John's treatment of her children, she said, was becoming unbearable. But Judy wasn't acknowledging her own blind spots. She often took her children's side, even when their behavior was clearly spiraling, adding more fuel to an already volatile fire. Then, everything began to unravel. John suspected Judy was having an affair with one of his employees. Unwilling to let suspicion eat away at him, he took action in surveillance cameras around the office. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The evidence was undeniable. His wife was cheating on him. Devastated, John's personality began to change. The once charismatic leader spiraled into bitterness. He started drinking heavily. His arguments with Judy became explosive. His parenting turned harsh and violent. One day, after Tiffany's teacher called home to say she had forgotten her homework, John beat her with a belt. The next day, the teacher noticed the bruises and called social services. Fearing what might happen, John warned the children to stay quiet if they wanted to keep their lifestyle. Tiffany pointed the finger at her stepbrother, Daniel. He didn't deny it. John's emotional collapse extended beyond the home. His business began to suffer. His once patient demeanor with employees and clients was replaced with angry outbursts. In a desperate attempt to save his marriage and sever Judy's connection to her alleged lover, John moved the family to an upscale area in Crown Point, Indiana. He hoped a change in scenery would change everything, but it didn't. While Judy revamped her appearance, losing weight, and updating her wardrobe, John let himself go. He grew a scruffy beard, chain-smoked, and wore the same jeans daily. He became distracted, distant, and the business teetered on the edge of collapse. He even had to sell his beloved boat to make ends meet. Rumors swirled that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's trusted right-hand man. Whether true or not, the whispers fueled John's growing resentment. Eventually, Judy made a bold declaration she wanted a divorce, but John wasn't going to make it easy. He reminded her of everything he'd given her, a way out of poverty, a home, a family, and luxury beyond anything she'd ever known. Now, all of that was in jeopardy. He cut her off financially, told her if she left, she'd leave with nothing, and he had leveraged a recording of her affair with a colleague by early 2003. The stress had taken a toll on everyone, especially the children. Tiffany, once quiet and sweet, had been caught, setting a fire at school with a friend. Then came the day everything changed. Thursday, April 17, 2003. In what may have been a last-ditch attempt to reconcile, John and Judy went out for dinner, just the two of them. After the meal, they called home to check in and let the kids know they'd be back shortly. Christina asked if they could stop by her office and pick up a school notebook she had forgotten. On their way home, they made a detour. They stopped at the office, a deserted industrial complex. Just before 10 p.m., John stepped inside to speak with Jeff, who was allegedly working late. Judy retrieved the notebook and waited outside in the car. Moments later, John emerged from the building. Had just stepped out of the office when he opened the rear driver's side door of his vehicle, apparently looking for something. Suddenly, 2 sharp gunshots echoed through the night. John collapsed onto the cold pavement almost instantly. Panicked, Judy and Jeff immediately dialed 911. Police and emergency responders arrived within minutes. But tragically, 33-year-old John Parker had been shot in the back of the head and was pronounced dead at the scene. Judy, who had been sitting in the car at the time of the shooting, told officers she hadn't seen much. She recalled that, as John opened the back door, 2 loud bangs rang out. She instinctively ducked for cover behind the seat. When she finally looked up, she caught a glimpse of a dark-clad figure fleeing the area. John's wallet was missing, which initially led investigators to suspect a robbery. But as they examined the scene more closely, doubts began to surface. Why would a robber target a deserted industrial area late at night, with no witnesses in sight? Why would they kill John first, and then take his wallet, when they could have stolen the $2,000 gold Rolex on his wrist, or the other jewelry he was wearing? And why hadn't they searched his pockets, a routine act in most robbery homicides? 2 bullet casings were recovered at the scene, corroborating Judy's account of hearing 2 shots. 1 bullet had struck John fatally. The trajectory and purpose of the second shot remained unclear. With these unanswered questions, investigators launched a full inquiry. Judy was naturally the first person to be questioned. She revealed that John had recently clashed with an employee at the company and was able to identify the individual. But beyond that, she offered little more than what she'd already said at the scene. Jeff, the company's general manager, said he'd been inside the office during the incident and only came out after hearing the shots at the Parker residence. Christina answered the phone when police called to notify the family of John's death. With the robbery theory quickly falling apart, attention turned to John's personal and professional circle. Investigators began by interviewing the disgruntled employee. He admitted to having a heated argument with John, but insisted the matter had been resolved amicably. His alibi checked out. From there, detectives cast a wider net, speaking to current and former employees, business partners, competitors, friends, and even family. One minor red flag surfaced during their interviews, an unusually close interaction between Judy and Jeff. But nothing solid came of it, no concrete evidence, just suspicions. Judy's demeanor at John's funeral also raised eyebrows. Witnesses noted that she appeared cheerful, casually chatting with friends, seemingly unaffected by her husband's death. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 older children, also acted strangely calmly, reading a newspaper during the service. In the days that followed, investigators turned their attention to Judy's 15-year-old son, Daniel. 6 months earlier, Daniel had reportedly paid gang members to kill his stepfather. But the hit never happened. The men took the money and vanished. After John's death, Daniel was questioned again. He admitted he had paid for John to be harmed, not killed. But after 9 days in custody, he was released due to insufficient evidence. During that time, investigators also began to focus on Judy's 17-year-old daughter, Christina. When questioned, Christina denied any involvement. Like the earlier plan involving Daniel, this too was initially dismissed. But detectives had lingering doubts. Both teens had voiced a desire to eliminate Jinan. Someone had to be funding their attempts. Investigators suspected that Judy was the source. They also discovered that Judy and John's relationship had been falling apart. One of Judy's extramarital affairs had recently come to light. Still, John had reportedly wanted to save the marriage. He wasn't planning to leave Judy. Then came the potential motive: money. Detectives uncovered 2 life insurance policies taken out on John's life, totaling $1 million. Judy had already attempted to collect the payout, but the insurance companies refused to release the funds due to the ongoing investigation. John's father also strongly suspected Judy was involved in his son's death and worked to block the claim. Despite the mounting suspicions, there was still no hard evidence. The case stalled. Meanwhile, life inside the Parker household shifted dramatically. Judy was rarely home, spending most of her time with Jeff, John's former manager, and her apparent new partner. The older children looked after Judy's youngest daughters, Tiffany and Erica. Eventually, Judy and Jeff moved out of state with the younger girls. Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina, now pregnant, remained at the family home with her boyfriend. Still, detectives kept revisiting the case. Then, a new lead emerged. Detectives questioned Christina and Daniel's classmates, who revealed they had sold a firearm to the teens. Investigators followed this lead to land owned by Christina's family and they discovered spent bullet casings that matched those found at the crime scene. In 2007, a narcotics officer working an unrelated drug case came forward with a key tip. The officer had been investigating Christina's ex-boyfriend, who, in an attempt to lessen his sentence, revealed a disturbing conversation. He claimed Judy had confessed to him that Daniel was the one who pulled the trigger. With this new testimony and forensic evidence, detectives confronted Christina, 21, whose connection to the murder weapon had already been established. She cracked. Christina admitted she had purchased the gun on the night of the murder. She called her parents and asked them to stop by the office under the pretense that she'd left her homework there. She also confessed to being part of the plan to kill John. Her brother Daniel was the designated shooter. Daniel, now 19, was tracked down in Arizona. Confronted with his sister's testimony and the ballistics evidence, he confessed too. According to Daniel, their mother Judy had orchestrated the entire plot. She had fraudulently written company checks to come up with $77,500 money intended to pay a hitman. But when the hired men took the money and disappeared, Judy allegedly told Daniel and Christina to carry out the murder themselves. Daniel claimed it was his mother, Judy, who orchestrated every step of the plan. She not only chose the weapon, but also came up with the excuse to leave the house that night, staging a call about forgotten homework as the pretext. Daniel admitted to shooting John once in the head and said the second shot went off by accident while he was rifling through John's pockets for his Wallatan act. He said, "Done under Judy's instruction," before returning home. Daniel was told to avoid alerting his younger sisters, a task made easier by Christina, who kept them distracted with the television. Both siblings later testified that their mother manipulated them into committing the murder by claiming they were victims of abuse at John's hands and promising them a better life, one filled with freedom and financial comfort. It also came to light that this wasn't Judy's first attempt to end John's life. She had previously tried to poison his food, which had only led to a short hospital stay, chalked up to food poisoning. By the end of 2007, both Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to conspiracy and was released on bail several months later. In March 2008, Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. In return, they dropped the more serious murder charge, though he still faced 20 to 25 years behind bars. Daniel testified that the murder plot had begun nearly a year earlier. When he was just 14, he claimed his mother and sister first approached him back then with the plan. Judy had even given them money to buy a handgun, along with black clothing, gloves, and a mask. She allegedly gave Daniel detailed instructions, including taking a thorough shower afterward to remove any traces of gunpowder residue. Judy herself handled the disposal of the weapon, the clothing used during the murder, and John's wallet. In July 2009, 6 years after John's death, Judy finally turned herself in. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, fully acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. Prosecutors requested a life sentence, with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35, nearing 40 years old. Judy was sentenced to 33 years in prison in August 2009. A month later, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years. In early October, Christina, who ultimately pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She served 4 before being released in 2013. But tragically, she died of a drug overdose shortly thereafter. Daniel, meanwhile, was released in 2017 after completing a community transition court program and has since lived a low-profile life. This case is one steeped in greed and manipulation. Judy's troubled upbringing and eventual material success only deepened her appetite for more and more money, more control, more freedom. Her choices destroyed a man who had once loved her and left a permanent scar on all 4 of her children. 2 ended up in prison, and the youngest were left without parents. Now, let's turn to another harrowing case, the abduction of Fusako Sano. Fusako Sano, later known as Sachiko Yamato, was born on November 28, 1980, in the quiet town of Mie, in Japan's Nagata Prefecture. She was raised in a modest, loving household, a cheerful and active child. Fusako loved baseball and passionately supported her local team. On November 13, 1990, just 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, stayed late after school to watch a baseball game. Her parents knew about the event, so they weren't alarmed when she didn't return home right away. That evening, the streets were quiet and the autumn air had turned cold. As she walked her usual route home, something happened that would change her life forever. A car suddenly pulled up, overtaking her and screeching to a halt. The sharp sound of the brakes shattered the silence. What followed was the beginning of a nearly decade-long nightmare. The man behind the wheel was Nobuyuki Sato, born July 15, 1962, also in Niigata. He came from a wealthy family involved in passenger transportation. Born late in his father's life, his father was 62 at the time. Nobuyuki grew up without much connection to his 5 older half-siblings. He was spoiled and emotionally unstable, prone to outbursts when he didn't get his way. Even as a child, Nobuyuki exhibited troubling behavior. He once physically attacked his mother in a public store because she refused to buy him another toy. At school, he was ostracized for his odd behavior, his tall frame, and his tendency to slouch in self-consciousness. Nicknames and bullying followed. Despite his family's wealth, Nobuyuki was deeply unhappy. His parents built a grand European-style home with a large, sunny room on the 2nd floor meant just for him. But he refused to stay in it, claiming he was terrified of being alone there. His fears were so persistent that his parents eventually sought medical advice. He was diagnosed with several mental disorders: nyctophobia, fear of the dark; mysophobia, fear of germs; autophobia, fear of being alone, and sociophobia, fear of social interaction. In essence, Nobuyuki was terrified of both solitude and human contact. His emotional instability persisted into adulthood. He struggled to maintain jobs, often leaving work abruptly sometimes, just because it was raining. On one occasion, he injured a female coworker, seemingly in a misguided attempt to get her attention. Though labeled an accident, it led to his immediate firing. After that, Nobuyuki stopped working altogether, depending entirely on his parents for financial support. His world grew smaller. He became increasingly isolated, and his behavior more erratic, and in that dark isolation, he found his opportunity. During one of his frequent violent outbursts, Nobuki set fire to his family's home, nearly destroying it, and putting the lives of everyone inside at risk. This extreme act resulted in his mandatory admission to a psychiatric facility, where he was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and episodes of uncontrollable aggression. Clinicians also noted deep-seated misogyny, disturbing hatred toward women. After just over a month of treatment, Nobuki was discharged, deemed no longer a danger to others. For a while, things appeared to calm. He even took on the task of rebuilding the damaged house, adding new rooms to the structure. But that effort, like many others in his life, was abandoned just as suddenly as it began. Following a failed attempt at kidnapping, Nobuki withdrew even further from society. He became reclusive and hostile. He spent nearly all his time locked in his room, watching television. Over time, he began to forbid his parents from even stepping onto the second floor of their own home. If they crossed this invisible line, he would lash out, violently beating them and threatening to kill them. By the spring of 1989, Nobuki had developed a disturbing new habit, taking long walks near a local school, closely observing the girls. At first he kept his distance, but one day, he suddenly lunged at a 9-year-old girl outside the school gates. In full view of her classmates, he grabbed the child, slung her over his shoulder, and ran toward his parked car. The other children screamed and alerted nearby adults. A security guard and several passers-by intervened just in time. They rescued the girl and detained her would-be abductor until the police arrived. Nobuki was charged with attempted abduction and assault on a minor. He faced serious prison time, but in court, that August, he was handed only a 1-year probation sentence. His father, a man with influence and financial means, allegedly paid a hefty sum to help his son avoid prison. Records of the case quietly disappeared from the system soon after, once again due to his father's interference. The stress and guilt of shielding his violent son ultimately took its toll. Nobuki's father suffered a heart attack and died not long after. Roughly 18 months later, Nobuki struck again. On November 13, 1990, 28-year-old Nobuki got into his car and aimlessly drove around for hours. As the sun began to set, he turned onto a deserted stretch of road. That's where he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, walking home from school, delayed that day by a sports activity. There were no cars around, no people, no one to call for help. He pulled his car up abruptly, got out holding a knife, and threatened the girl. If she screamed or ran, he told her, he'd slit her throat. Then he forced her into the trunk. A short while later, he stopped in a vacant lot, opened the trunk, bound Fusako's hands and feet, and taped her mouth shut. Once darkness had fully settled in, he drove home. To avoid being seen, he carried her through an unfinished section of his home, then re-entered through the main door, as if nothing had happened. He took her upstairs, tied her to the bed, and issued a terrifying ultimatum. If she made a sound, tried to escape, looked out the window, or cried, he would kill her and dump her body in the ocean. At home, her parents were growing increasingly worried. Fusako was often late due to school sports, but she was never out this long. They retraced her usual route, hoping she had simply gotten delayed. But as night fell, they went to the police. The search began almost immediately. Dozens of officers and local volunteers combed the area that night. By the next morning, the number had grown to over 200. Flyers with Fusako's face appeared everywhere. People searched buildings, abandoned lots, trailers, and railroad cars. Roads were checked, highway exits monitored, but no one suspected. Nobuki, he lived just a few blocks from both the school and the local police station, and because of his father's influence, his name had been wiped from the criminal database. Even though he had previously attempted to kidnap this very girl, he was never questioned. Weeks turned into months. Theories ranged from accidental disappearance to outlandish ideas, including possible abduction by North Korean agents, but none of them were true. Fusako was still alive, trapped in Nobuki's house. According to Fusako's own later testimony, she complied with everything at first, praying he might one day let her go, but Nobuki had no such intentions. In the early months of her captivity, he bound her hands and feet so tightly that blood circulation was cut off. Her limbs began to go numb. Any resistance was met with violence. He beat her, used a stun gun on her, and frequently threatened her with a knife. Despite this, Nobuki never sexually assaulted her. He did not treat her as a woman, but as a bizarre mix between a captive, a doll, and a pet. She was not allowed to speak to anyone but him. He fed her once or twice a day, meals prepared by his mother, who lived downstairs and remained unaware of the horror unfolding above her. The girl became severely malnourished. Nobuki didn't allow her to leave the bed and forced her to use plastic bags for bathroom needs. Once a month, he bathed her in a basin, cut her hair and nails himself, and clothed her in worn-out, oversized clothes of his own. Even when she obeyed, he would beat her without reason, often just for amusement. For years, Fusako Sano was held captive, psychologically broken and completely submissive to her tormentor. She no longer tried to escape or even glance out the window. Nobuyuki Sato eventually stopped tying her up and no longer locked the door. He would simply make the bed with her lying in it, throwing blankets or towels over her, hiding her in plain sight. Over time, he began allowing small privileges. He'd turn on her radio now and then, or let her watch television, but only shows or sports he enjoyed. He also gave her comic books, which were his own obsession. These became her only form of reading during nearly a decade in confinement. In all that time, she never saw another soul except her captor. She remained on the bed, barely moving, so psychologically defeated that the idea of escape no longer existed for her. Downstairs, Nobuyuki's elderly mother lived on the first floor. Terrified of her son, she strictly followed his rules. He had threatened her violently if she ever stepped foot into his room again. On one occasion, when she attempted to go upstairs, he shoved her down the stairs. She worked long hours to avoid being home, but after retiring in 1996 at age 73, her situation worsened. Her son beat her regularly, imposed strange rules, and made her life intolerable. That year, she finally went to the police to report domestic abuse, but they turned her away, encouraging her to handle it as a family matter. Twice, she sought help from public health officials, requesting her son be institutionalized, but her pleas were dismissed as not serious enough. Instead, she was advised to convince him to seek help voluntarily. Nearly 4 years passed. In January 2000, after a particularly brutal beating, this time involving a taser, she called for emergency medical assistance and demanded police presence. When officials arrived, Nobuyuki grew agitated and violent, attempting to fight them off. He had to be restrained and sedated. In the chaos, the truth finally began to unravel. The mother, trembling and exhausted, confessed she hadn't been upstairs in years, too afraid of what her son might do. Police went to investigate the second floor. In his room, something under it. The blankets moved. When they pulled them back, they discovered a pale, skeletal girl lying silently beneath them. When asked who she was, she quietly gave her name, Fusako Sano. She said she had been kidnapped on her way home from school many years ago. Nobuyuki's mother was brought in and asked if she recognized the girl. She seemed genuinely shocked and insisted she had no idea anyone else lived in the house. Fusako confirmed that she had never seen the woman before in all her years of captivity. At the police station, Nobuyuki calmly explained that he had kidnapped Fusako because he found her attractive. He claimed he took care of her, fed her, bathed her, read comic books to her hand, only punished her when she disobeyed. He insisted she enjoyed their conversations and believed she returned his feelings, since she had never tried to escape. He was convinced she wanted to stay, despite his mental instability. Medical professionals concluded he was competent to stand trial. His mother was considered as a potential accomplice, since she had purchased feminine hygiene products for him, and may have suspected something, but her repeated attempts to seek help from authorities ultimately cleared her of charges. The case caused national outrage. Years earlier, Nobuyuki had been prosecuted for attempting to abduct another girl, but no further action had been taken. A gross oversight. In the aftermath, both the local police chief and head of the regional department were dismissed for their negligence. In May 2000, Nobuyuki was convicted on all charges and sentenced to the maximum term then allowed, 14 years in prison. He was released in 2015. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home. A year and a half later, Nobuyuki Sato was found dead in a small rented room. The cause of death was never disclosed. As for Fusako, she was so malnourished upon rescue that she could barely stand. Her muscles had atrophied, her speech was nearly gone, and she was terrified of sunlight. Doctors diagnosed her with extreme dehydration, exhaustion, and severe psychological trauma. When her parents finally saw her again after almost a decade, they didn't even recognize their daughter. It took nearly a year for Fusako to begin healing, physically, but her emotional recovery took far longer. Diagnosed with PTSD, she remained at the cognitive level of a 9 or 10-year-old child. Her family changed her name to So Yamada and moved her to a different town. She refused to speak to the media. Over time, she began to reclaim parts of her life. She made friends, picked up photography, and even earned her driver's license. But in 2007, tragedy struck again. Her father drowned in front of her during a family outing to a river. At the end of Romeo and Juliet, the Duke famously says, "Never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo." But unlike Shakespeare's tragedy, where the young lovers choose death, the ending of this story unfolded through survival and the cost it exacted. Many families in the small suburb of Leeds belonged to the Christian Unish community, living a life devoted to faith and simplicity. They intentionally distanced themselves from modern technologies and distractions, seeking a quieter, more spiritual existence. For the deeply religious Borden family, settling in Leeds was no coincidence. It was a deliberate choice. The suburb offered everything they believed was essential to raising children: safety, solitude, and spiritual grounding. Life in Leeds moved at a calm, predictable pace. Days blurred together in peaceful repetition, just as the Bordens had hoped. Michael Borden was an active member of the local church. He taught Sunday school and served his community with humility and commitment. His wife, Catherine, managed their home and supported her husband's church work. Although Michael valued spiritual wealth above all else, he worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for the family's practical needs. Over the years, the couple had 5 children, boys and 2 girls. Like most families in Leeds, the Bordens raised their children within the strict moral guidelines of their faith. Families were large, often with 5 or more children, and homeschooling was the norm. Children rarely interacted with outsiders. Their world revolved around the church, youth groups, and occasional religious celebrations. Neighbors admired the Borden children, Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel, praising their good manners and the disciplined way they were being raised. But the harmony in the Borden household began to shift when their eldest daughter, Kara, entered her teenage years. Despite the family's strict rules, Kara started pushing back. She joined the local soccer team against her father's wishes, snuck out to discos, and indulged in the very freedoms her upbringing had taught her to avoid. Her behavior stunned her parents, especially her father, who tried long and hard to reason with her. But the talks and warnings didn't reach Kara. Arguments became frequent, and her rebellions escalated. In 2005, 14-year-old Kara met 18-year-old David Ludwig at a support group for homeschooled teens. Their connection was instant and intense. Attracted to what they had both been denied for so long, they started a secret friendship. They created hidden social media accounts and began exchanging emotional, encrypted messages to avoid detection. Their bond deepened quickly. What began as innocent walks through secluded parts of town soon evolved into secret rendezvous and late-night escapes to discos. David had already experienced love and heartbreak, but for Kara, these feelings were new and all-consuming. She floated through her days, unable to hide her joy. For a time, her cheerful behavior reassured her parents. Michael believed the worst had passed, but he was wrong. Kara's happiness wasn't because she had returned to the values her parents taught her. It was because she was in love, a love she kept hidden out of fear. She knew what her parents would say if they found out. From a young age, she'd been taught that relationships like hers and David's, especially at her age, were inappropriate and sinful. Still, secrets have a way of surfacing. Unable to contain her excitement, Kara eventually confided in her younger sister. She showed her a picture of David and shared how deeply in love they were. She even admitted they were ready to run away together if necessary. Alarmed, her sister told their mother everything. The secret was out. One early morning, Kara returned home from a date with David. She climbed through the window as quietly as she could, but when she entered her bedroom, she froze. Her mother was sitting on the bed, waiting. The confrontation came after breakfast. Her parents forbade her from seeing David again. They were devastated. After all they'd done to protect their children from violence, drugs, and worldly dangers, how could this have happened? Her father was furious. That night, he confined Kara to her room. Earlier that same morning, David had dropped Kara off near the house around 5:30 a.m., and they had agreed that she would send him a message once she was safely inside, but the message never came. Worried, David called and sent messages repeatedly. Finally, Kara replied. She'd been caught. Her parents wanted to speak with him. David arrived promptly. The conversation was intense. Michael expressed his outrage and forbade David from ever seeing his daughter again. He warned the young man that if he continued the relationship, he would report him to the police for pursuing a minor. Despite David's pleas and professions of love, the Bordens would not be swayed. David left heartbroken. It was the first time he cried over a girl lore, perhaps from the pain of being treated as if his feelings didn't matter. The forced separation was agonizing for both of them. They tried to move on, but the longing didn't fade. Eventually, they came up with a new plan. They would pretend to end the relationship to earn her parents' trust, but continue their romance in secret. In public and at church, they played their roles well. They didn't speak or even look at each other. The deception worked. Her parents believed the danger had passed, but the pain of separation grew too great. David pined for Kara. He read Shakespeare in the evenings, imagining himself as Romeo, waiting to be reunited with his Juliet. Like Shakespeare's lovers, they couldn't bridge the divide between their worlds, and David, feeling desperate and determined, made a bold decision. He called Kara's home and requested a meeting with her father. This time, David Ludwig wasn't coming to plead. He was coming with a plan and a willingness to change everything. The Borden family tragedy, When Young Love Turns Deadly. On November 13, 2005, 18-year-old David Ludwig arrived at the Borden family home for a serious conversation with Michael Borden, the father of his 14-year-old girlfriend, Kara Beth. David professed his deep love for Kara and revealed their plan to get married, but Michael, understandably alarmed, dismissed the idea outright. That will never happen. David had anticipated this response. Consumed by rage and carrying a concealed handgun, he waited until Michael turned to walk away, then shot him in the back. David then moved through the house and found Kara's mother, Catherine, sitting in a chair. Without hesitation, he shot her too. After the murders, David frantically searched the house, calling out for Kara, but she was nowhere to be found, so he got into his red Volkswagen Jetta and began to drive away. Moments later, he spotted Kara, running down the road toward him. She climbed into the car. "I want to go," she told him. "Let's get as far away as we can get married and start a new life." And just like that, they were gone. The teenage couple fled the town, sparking a multi-state manhunt and a flurry of media attention. Why would a 14-year-old girl choose to run away with the man who had just brutally killed her parents? Weren't they both considered good kids? For 24 hours, Kara Beth was listed as missing. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from nearby stores, which confirmed something disturbing. Kara had willingly left with David. She wasn't abducted, with the entire eastern U.S. on alert. The couple was spotted on surveillance footage at gas stations across Pennsylvania and Indiana. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a red Jetta parked at a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. By the time police arrived, the car was gone. Just before noon, Indiana State Police spotted the vehicle speeding down I-70 near What followed was a dangerous high-speed chase, reaching up to 95 miles per hour, according to Trooper David Cox. David Ludwig drove recklessly, causing multiple near collisions. It was like something out of an action movie. After 28 hours on the run, the saga ended when Ludwig crashed the car into a tree. Both teens were taken into custody. Ludwig was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, although the abduction charge would later be dropped. Kara Beth, declared a victim, was released into the care of relatives and church members. Following his arrest, Ludwig waived extradition and was returned to Pennsylvania. He made a full confession. It was deliberate. "I intended to shoot them if they got in our way, and I did." During a search of the Ludwig family home, police found a cache of 54 firearms, all legally owned by David's father, an avid hunter who had taught his son to handle guns from a young age. Investigators also recovered an 18-minute video showing Ludwig discussing an abandoned plan to invade another family's home. In court, the story grew even darker. According to Kara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, the killings came after an hour-long argument between David and her parents. Caitlin told investigators she saw David shoot her father, then fled to the bathroom where she heard a second gunshot. Meanwhile, the Borden's 9-year-old son ran to a neighbor's house, where a call to 911 was placed. On June 20, 2006, David Ludwig pleaded guilty as part of a deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 9.5 to 19 years, and ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Kara Beth faced no charges. In written court statements, prosecutors emphasized that she had voluntarily gone with Ludwig. Surveillance footage from multiple states supported this conclusion. Ludwig's defense attorney even noted that Kara had ample opportunities to escape, but chose not to. She later admitted that she ran after him when he left her home. At a memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Kara mourned her parents alongside her siblings. The Borden family's neighborhood was adorned with white ribbons in remembrance. 5 children were left orphaned. George Landis, an elder at the Monterey Chapel, said, "The purpose behind such a tragedy is known only to God, but Mike and Katie are now in a better place." Vera Zimmerman, who had known both families for years, offered a sobering reflection. "It was a lapse in judgment. That's all it takes." The Borden family murders a tragedy of young love and lost faith. Kara Beth Borden was a sociable young girl, well-liked in her tight-knit Pennsylvania community, known for her passion for soccer and regular babysitting gigs. She was active in her church youth group, as noted by Kevin Eckelman, executive pastor at the Afro Community Church. But beneath her bright exterior, simmering tensions brewed at home, particularly over her growing interest in boys. Vera Zimmerman, a family acquaintance, later confirmed that Kara's relationship with 18-year-old David Ludwig was a point of contention. Her parents strongly disapproved. In fact, they went so far as to disconnect the family's internet service in an effort to curb the secret communications between Kara and David. According to legal documents, the relationship had already turned inappropriate, marked by flirty online exchanges and the sharing of illicit images. Samuel P. Lohr, a friend of David's, told authorities that the two teens had a secret, intimate relationship, one that flourished under the radar of parental supervision. The peaceful community was shattered by what came next. On November 13, 2005, David Ludwig shot and killed Michael and Catherine Borden after a heated confrontation about his relationship with their daughter. Then, he fled with 14-year-old Kara for nearly 28 hours. The nation watched as police launched a multi-state manhunt, unsure whether Kara was a victim or accomplice. The case stunned not only their town but homeschooling communities across the country. Many found it hard to fathom how children raised in Christian homes, protected from worldly influences, could fall into such darkness, according to 16-year-old Stephanie Mammon, a neighbor of the Borden family. David and Kara were not officially a couple due to her parents' firm disapproval, but clearly, that boundary had been crossed in secret. And when David Ludwig faced the prospect of losing Kara, he responded not with heartbreak, but with violence. On June 20, 2006, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 9.5 to 19 years in prison. His appeal for release was later denied by the Pennsylvania Superior Court. Following his sentencing, Ludwig was transferred from Lancaster County Jail to the State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove on August 3rd. Susan McNaughton, spokesperson for the Department of Corrections, said the move was due to Pine Grove's youthful offender program, tailored for inmates aged 15 to 20. The program aimed to instill self-discipline, responsibility, and respect at Pine Grove. Inmates live by a strict routine beginning at 6:10 a.m. with roll call, followed by a 6:30 a.m. physical training session, including squats, jogging, and push-ups. Educational programming dominates much of the day, covering trades such as culinary arts, computer drafting, heating cooling systems, and personal life management skills. Inmates also participate in a 90-day military-style leadership course meant to teach honor, honesty, and integrity. Ludwig's attorney, Maram Spann, noted that adjusting to life at Pine Grove was difficult. After earning his high school diploma in county jail, the transition to a larger facility with new routines and a different population proved challenging. Nonetheless, David was assigned jobs, likely janitorial or kitchen work, and began earning between 18 and 42 cents an hour to use in the prison commissary. Most inmates remain at Pine Grove until age 22, before being transferred to adult prisons. Now 37 years old, David Ludwig continues to serve his life sentence in Luzerne County. In a recent petition, he cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court decision, deeming mandatory life sentences for juvenile offenders unconstitutional. However, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rejected his appeal, agreeing with Lancaster County Judge David Ashworth's ruling that Ludwig was legally an adult at the time, 18 and a half years old, and therefore not entitled to juvenile protections. Meanwhile, Kara Beth Borden returned to Pennsylvania and reunited with her surviving family. Though some speculated about her involvement in the crime, police ultimately deemed her a victim and never filed charges. CBS. News correspondent Sharon Alphonsy reported that Kara was deeply shaken and inconsolable. Warwick Police Chief Rich Jr. said, "She's crying. She's 14 years old. We can't forget that. She's devastated." A neighbor involved in the Borden family's memorial service told reporters, "They were wonderful people. We'll miss them terribly." Lancaster County Coroner G. Gary Kirshner added, "This isn't a Romeo and Juliet story. It's much worse." In the end, David Ludwig made a single, impulsive choice, one driven by rage, fear, and desperation. But that choice claimed 3 lives, the 2 he murdered in many ways his own. Because while he breathes and walks inside prison walls, David Ludwig is no longer free, nor will he ever be again. Yet the community still wonders, how could this have happened? These were not reckless, unsupervised kids. They were homeschooled, raised in Christian households, guided by faith. Still, something went deeply wrong. Perhaps the parents, trusting God and following traditional values, missed signs of rebellion. Perhaps they didn't have the deep, honest conversations that might have stopped their daughter from secretly meeting Ludwig. Perhaps in their attempt to shield her from the world, they inadvertently pushed her toward it. And maybe, just maybe, it would have been better to raise her with trust rather than fear. To guide her through life's complexities rather than try to block them out completely. He grew up in a time when children weren't micromanaged, when freedom was abundant, and restrictions were few. But with that freedom often came choices that led to disappointment. In hindsight, we're left to wonder, could this tragedy have been prevented? One thing is certain, violence breeds more violence. When children grow up in environments where violence is normalized, they learn to accept it, endure it, and eventually use it to solve their own problems. Sadly, this acceptance is often perpetuated in homes where love and faith should prevail. In many Christian households, discipline is sometimes indistinguishable from abuse. On December 20th, 2017, a press conference brought a long-awaited breakthrough. Mark Perez, special agent in charge with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, stood before reporters and revealed what had really happened to Mike Williams, a Tallahassee real estate appraiser, who vanished on December 16, 2000. Mike Williams did not drown. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't run away and abandon his wife and baby girl. He was murdered. 17 years of silence, 17 years of doubt and speculation. But Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, never gave up. She refused to believe the official story that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole during a solo duck hunt. She pushed relentlessly for the case to be reopened. "I had 2 choices: believe he was alive or accept that he was gone. I chose to believe he was alive, and I really think that's what helped me," Cheryl later said. The day before that press conference, Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend and the man who would later marry Mike's widow, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Retribution had begun. The people responsible for Mike's death were about to face justice. Ironically, it was their fear of each other that finally brought the truth to light. Back in 2000, Brian and Denise Williams had been having an affair for years. What started in 1997 as a secret romance turned into a deadly conspiracy. By 2017, their relationship had disintegrated, and Brian feared that Denise might turn him in, so he kidnapped her. Denise, in turn, pushed the court to give Brian the maximum sentence. She testified passionately at his sentencing hearing, unaware that her testimony would push him over the edge. With nothing left to lose, Brian struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for full immunity from prosecution for Mike's murder, he led authorities to the body and gave a full confession. On May 8, 2018, just months after the press conference, Denise Williams was arrested. But how did it come to this? Let's rewind. Jerry Michael Williams, known as Mike to his family and friends, was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, just north of Tallahassee. His father drove a bus, and his mother was a kindergarten teacher. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Mike and his older brother were raised in a trailer, and though money was tight, their parents prioritized education over material comforts. Mike worked nights at a supermarket while attending North Florida Christian High School. He was a standout, student class president, a soccer player, and active in the Key Club at 15. He took up duck hunting, a hobby that would become both a passion and, eventually, the setting of a crime. It was at school that Mike met Denise Merrill. She was a cheerleader and secretary of the student council. The two started dating, and it seemed like the perfect match. Through Denise, Mike also met Brian Winchester, who became his best friend. Later, Brian began dating Kathy Thomas. The two couples were inseparable. After high school, Mike and Denise attended Florida State University, where he studied political science and urban planning. Denise became an accountant, and Mike pursued real estate appraisal. In 1994, they married. Around the same time, Brian married Kathy. Mike was known for his work ethically, putting in 15-hour days. By his early 30s, he was earning nearly $200,000 a year. The couple bought a home in a prestigious neighborhood on Tallahassee's east side. In 1999, they welcomed their daughter Ansley. Mike adored his family and wanted to ensure their future was secure. Because of his risky hobbies like duck hunting, he purchased life insurance. He turned to Brian, now working as an insurance agent, to help him. Brian sold Mike to policies totaling $750,000. Then, after Mike's father passed away unexpectedly, he added another, this one for $1 million. All told, Mike's life was insured for nearly $2 million just 6 months before his disappearance. On the morning of December 16, 2000, the couple's 6th wedding anniversary, Mike left home early to go duck hunting at Lake Seminole, a vast body of water connected to the Apalachicola River. Denise and their daughter waited for him at home. By noon, Mike still hadn't returned. Concerned, Denise called her father, who then contacted Brian. Brian and his own father headed out to the lake, and soon found Mike's Ford Bronco parked at the boat dock. But Mike was gone. They searched the surrounding area and found nothing, not even the boat. So they called law enforcement. Officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission joined the search. A few hours later, a helicopter spotted a boat floating about 225 feet from the ramp. Inside, they found Mike's shotgun, but there was no sign of Mike himself. The disappearance of Mike Williams, a mother's relentless search for the truth. Mike Williams vanished on December 16, 2000. During a solo duck hunting trip at Lake Seminole in Florida. His shotgun was still in its case. Certainly he never had a chance to use it. At first, the search for Mike was treated as a rescue mission. Locals speculated that before the area was flooded to create the reservoir, it had been an orchard. That's how the area got its nickname, Stump Field. Countless tree stumps, both above and below the water, made the lake treacherous for any motorboat. Searchers believed Mike might have hit one of those stumps, fallen overboard, and drowned his heavy waders, possibly dragging him under. Multiple agencies joined the search, including units from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. But despite the thorough efforts, no trace of Mike could be found. After a week, the operation shifted from a rescue to a recovery. Divers used probe poles to scour the lake bottom. Cadaver dogs were brought in. 10 days in, volunteers discovered a camouflage hunting hat, but it couldn't be definitively linked to Mike. Then, a theory emerged. Mike had been eaten by alligators. Officials with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission supported this idea. The lake was home to numerous gators, and no other signs of a violent struggle were found. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement agreed, concluding Mike likely drowned and his body was consumed. After 5 fruitless weeks, the search was called off. The very next day, Mike's wife Denise held a memorial service. Less than 2 months After his disappearance, it appeared that Denise had already accepted her husband's death and was ready to move on. But Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, could not accept it. She was convinced something was wrong. 6 months later, in June 2001, an angler discovered a pair of waders floating on the lake. Divers returned and recovered a hunting jacket and flashlight from the lake bed. Inside the jacket's pocket was a hunting license bearing Mike Williams's name and signature. But the discovery raised red flags. None of the items showed signs of being underwater for 6 months. The boots weren't slimy, the flashlight still worked, and there were no alligator bite marks on the gear. Despite this, a week later, Denise's attorney petitioned the court to declare Mike legally dead, suggesting once again that alligators had completely devoured his body. The court granted the request. The death certificate listed the cause as accidental drowning while duck hunting, but Cheryl Williams refused to let the story end there. "All I know is that I can't stop looking until I find him," she said. Her search caused major strain in the family. Denise demanded that Cheryl stop. "I'm tired of the articles and attention. If you keep pushing this, you'll never see your granddaughter again." Denise kept that promise, cutting Cheryl off entirely. Still, Cheryl pressed on. Over the next few years, Cheryl launched a relentless campaign. She made daily phone calls, wrote to the governor of Florida, created a comprehensive evidence binder, contacted reporters, posted flyers, used social media to keep the case alive. Her persistence led her to Matthew Oresco, an alligator expert. He debunked the original theory: alligators don't feed in cold weather. In December, water temperatures dropped too low for them to eat. He also explained that even when gators do feed, they always leave forensic evidence: bone fragments, hair, or clothing. That was the turning point. After 3 years of pressure, Cheryl finally convinced law enforcement to drop the alligator theory and reopen the case. Officials began to reevaluate the disappearance. "My gut feeling is that Mike didn't die in Lake Seminole. That's the consensus among everyone working this case," said Rami Austin, a former investigator with the 2nd District State Attorney's Office. Initially, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission led the investigation because Mike was considered a missing hunter. They logged 735 hours, searching a 10-acre section of the lake, but not a single minute investigating foul play. Jackson County deputies helped with the search, but didn't explore other possibilities either. In hindsight, there were immediate red flags. Mike usually didn't hunt alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area, requiring him to drag his boat through mud, not the concrete boat launch he typically used. A violent storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, but it was found on the west. The motor wasn't running, but the gas tank was full. If Mike had fallen overboard, the boat should have kept circling until it ran out of fuel. By the time law enforcement began suspecting foul play, it was too late. The scene had been trampled by volunteers. A potential clue: Mike's car was taken by the family with no forensic verification. Witnesses went unspoken to. Suspicion soon fell on Denise Williams and Brian Winchester. Investigators discovered that Brian had sold Mike the life insurance policy worth nearly $2 million. Denise was the beneficiary. Not only had she received a massive financial windfall, but she also showed no interest in the investigation and actively tried to stop it. Meanwhile, Brian had divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise in 2005. Detectives brought the couple in for questioning, but they offered little of value. Brian claimed he had an alibi for the morning Mike disappeared. He was at home, 60 miles from the lake. The investigation was far from over. But Cheryl Williams had succeeded in one critical way. She'd forced the world to stop and listen. Brian Winchester told investigators he'd been in bed the morning Mike Williams vanished something. His ex-wife, Kathy, could confirm. He claimed he had planned to go hunting with his father-in-law that morning but had overslept. Denise Williams, questioned as well, offered no useful leads. Then, in 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement publicly announced what Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, had long suspected. Mike's disappearance was no accident. They believed he had been the victim of a crime, but without solid proof, they had no case. "We have suspicions," an FDLE official said, "but we need evidence." Cheryl Williams refused to accept that her son's case would remain unsolved. Her relentless efforts caught the attention of the Discovery Channel, which produced a segment on Mike's disappearance and the ongoing investigation in 2011. But by then, Cheryl had lost faith in law enforcement. She believed the FDLE was either incompetent or unwilling to solve the case. So, in 2012, she began writing one letter every single day to Florida Governor Rick Scott, asking him to reassign the case to a new agency or appoint a special prosecutor. Over the course of 9 years, Cheryl sent 2,600 letters. Meanwhile, Denise's carefully built life with Brian Winchester was falling apart. In 2012, she discovered Brian had been cheating. They broke up. The following year, she filed for divorce. But it wasn't until a court-ordered property appraisal in 2016 that their final ties were set to be severed. That moment became the tipping point. On August 5, 2016, the day of the appraisal, Denise was driving to work at Florida State University while on the phone with her sister. That's when she noticed movement in her back seat. A man suddenly lunged forward, pressing a loaded gun to her ribs. It was Brian Winchester. He told her he had to do this because she'd stopped answering his calls. Panicked but calm, Denise agreed with everything he said. She assured him she wouldn't report him. She even promised to give him a second chance. Convinced she meant it, Brian got out of the car, taking with him a plastic sheet, bleach, a sprayer, and tools. Denise immediately called 911. Brian was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping, armed burglary, and domestic assault. The kidnapping alone, a first-degree felony in Florida, carried a potential life sentence. The court denied him bail. For Cheryl Williams, this moment offered a glimmer of hope. Brian isn't going to let Denise run around alone with all that money, she told the New York Daily News. "I pray he finally tells us what really happened." And that's exactly what Brian did, facing a life sentence. Brian Winchester struck a deal with prosecutors, one that would spare him from dying behind bars in exchange for the truth. Brian's confession. At first, Brian said, "I think we were all doing well, but I wasn't a good husband." He recalled finding a note in his first wife Kathy's pursuivants. She was cheating. Devastated, he admitted he wanted revenge. Around that same time, he and his wife had been socializing regularly with Mike and Denise Williams. Brian had known Denise since high school. He said he wasn't particularly attracted to her at first, but after discovering Kathy's betrayal, everything changed. The affair with Denise began in October 1997, after a drunken one-night stand at a rock concert. Soon, it became a full-blown secret relationship. They met in hotel rooms during work hours whenever they could. Denise, however, was adamant. She would never divorce Mike. She cared deeply about her image and didn't want to share custody of her daughter. But their relationship deepened. They began exchanging gifts, writing love letters, and fantasizing about a life together. They couldn't bear being apart. Still, Denise remained unwilling to tarnish her reputation with a divorce. Then, a moment of opportunity. Mike nearly drowned in a hunting mishap, but Brian saved him. The incident planted a dark seed in Denise's mind. If Mike had died that day, they would have been free. And that's when the conversations turned serious. In 2000, Denise and Brian began plotting Mike's death. Denise wanted it to look like an accident, not a murder. She didn't want to be responsible, Brian said. She wanted to believe God made the decision. Their chosen method, a staged boating accident. Timing was crucial. Mike had 3 life insurance policies, and one was set to expire at the end of December 2000. They needed to act fast. Brian told Mike he'd found a perfect hunting spot near Lake Seminole and invited him out early that morning. Mike planned to return by noon to celebrate his anniversary with Denise. Brian insisted he wear his waders, telling Mike the area was swampy. Waders, they believed, would drag him down if he fell into the water. Once on the water, Brian shoved Mike out of the boat, but Mike didn't sink. He grabbed onto stumps and started making his way to shore. He shouted for help. Brian panicked. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "I had a shotgun. I was freaking out. I shot him in the head." What was supposed to look like a tragic accident had just become a homicide. Brian had no time. He was supposed to be heading out with his father-in-law that morning. No one knew he was at the lake with Mike, so he drove home, hoping his wife Kathy was still asleep. She was. He quietly got into bed, retrieved his phone, and called his father-in-law pretending he had just overslept. Later, Brian returned to the lake and buried Mike's body.